Let's talk about the world's go-to number for economic health, gross domestic product, GDP. It's how we rank countries, how we judge who's powerful and who's not. But what if that number, the one we rely on for everything, is fundamentally broken?
Now, this isn't just a random thought. For this deep dive, we're pulling from a really fascinating analysis by Dr. Senthil Kumar and the School of Fish Strategy Consulting, and they offer a whole new way of looking at this. For as long as most of us can remember, GDP has been the undisputed king. It's the one number that policymakers, investors, and news anchors all use to tell us how an economy is doing.
Yeah, you know this list, right? We see these rankings all the time, and we just kind of internalize this hierarchy of global power. It completely shapes how we see the world. But what if this picture isn't telling the whole story? Okay, so here's the textbook definition we all had to learn. Sounds solid, right? The total monetary value. But I want you to really focus on those two words, monetary value. Because according to this analysis, that's exactly where the problem starts.
So here's the core argument we're digging into today. That definition we all trust, the very foundation of how we measure economies, has a fundamental flaw that can seriously distort our view of reality.
And boom, there it is. This is the central idea from Dr. Kumar's work. He says GDP isn't really measuring product, the actual stuff being made. It's measuring money movement. And that is a massive difference.
Let's really break that down. We think we're measuring the real, tangible economy. Factories humming, crops growing, actual services being provided. But what we're actually tracking is just the flow of money, which can be pumped up by all sorts of things that have nothing to do with real production. It's a critical difference.
So this disconnect, this gap between product and money, creates two huge problems with how GDP works. First, you've got what's called the volume versus value problem, and second, you've got the speculation problem.
Okay, think about this for a second. This is flaw number one in action. A country could be making way more stuff. That's the production volume, going way up. But if competition or efficiency drives the price of each item down, all that incredible growth in real output gets completely flattened or even hidden in the final GDP number.
And this is the real kicker, isn't it? The real economy, the part that actually employs most people in factories and on farms, can be systematically undervalued by the very metric we use to measure it. The low price tag basically hides the country's true economic muscle.
Now for the second flaw. If the prices for real goods are flat or even falling, where is all the monetary growth coming from? Well, a lot of the time, it's from speculative activity, just money sloshing around in real estate or the stock market. This makes the GDP number look great, but it doesn't create any lasting value or jobs for most people.
Okay, so these flaws are interesting in theory, but what does it look like in the real world? Let's take a look at the case of India, because this analysis argues that these flaws lead to a massive, and I mean massive, underestimation of its entire economy.
The problem gets even worse when we start comparing countries using US dollars. This creates something called the dollar trap. It's just fundamentally misleading because it completely ignores the massive scale of what's happening inside a country in its own currency, especially when prices are low compared to the dollar.
First off, just wrap your head around the scale here. We're talking about an internal market of over 1.25 billion people. As the source points out, trying to compare this dollar for dollar with a much smaller country, it just doesn't make sense from the get-go. And here is the perfect example, the visual punchline, really. In just 1 year, India sold 21 million motorcycles and scooters. That is an absolutely enormous amount of real economic activity, manufacturing, sales, logistics, the whole thing. But because the price per scooter is low in dollar terms, this massive output just gets lost in the noise of global GDP rankings.
And you can see this hidden growth rate right here. The official GDP number, adjusted for prices, might look kind of modest. But if you look at the actual volume growth in core stuff like steel and cement, it's often hitting double digits. That real, physical 10% growth gets watered down when you convert it into a monetary figure where prices aren't really moving.
So, if GDP is giving us this distorted picture, how are we supposed to see the real economy more clearly? Well, the good news is the analysis doesn't just point out the problem. It actually proposes a better way to think about it.
So instead of obsessing over one single number, this framework suggests we ask 4 key questions. 1. What's the actual quantity and quality of what's being made? 2. Who's actually getting the money? 3. Is this growth even built to last? And 4.
What's the real intrinsic value of what our economy is creating?
Let's drill down on that income distribution point. GDP per capita is just an average, and averages can be so misleading, can't they? In a country with over 1 billion people, that average completely hides the fact that there might be a high-income market of hundreds of millions of people with massive purchasing power.
And sustainability is absolutely crucial. We've got to ask, where's the growth coming from? Is it from building real things like infrastructure in factories that will be around for decades, or is it just a temporary bubble fueled by debt or by using up resources too quickly? Only one of those creates real, long-term value.
So, as we start to wrap this up, it's pretty clear, isn't it? If we really want to understand how an economy is doing, we have to look beyond a single, simple number.
So if there's one thing to take away, it's this. Standard GDP figures can seriously underestimate huge economies that are driven by volume. The real engine of growth isn't just a bigger dollar figure, it's the actual amount of stuff being made and the true purchasing power of the people who live there.
And that really leads us to one final, much bigger question. When you think about things like sustainability and inequality, maybe the problem isn't just how we calculate GDP. Maybe the real question we should be asking ourselves is, should maximizing a monetary number be our main goal in the first place? Definitely something to think about.